my father has just been killed.
Both your mother and your father? They are not breathing at all?
I just walked in the door. I don't know what happened. They are dead.
I stood over him and began to strike his head repeatedly with a crowbar until his life was taken.
He could do that to my parents. What could he do to me?
This is the first encounter that I've had with a so-called vampire. To me, Rod Ferell is a mixed-up kid that had homicidal tendencies.
Any comment? Sure, you got something to say.
He joked about how long it took Mr. Wendorf to die.
I know he was laughing. I could feel it.
A 16-year-old kid beating a 49-year-old man and a 52-year-old woman to death with a crowbar, what was going to stop him from killing me?
Rod demonstrated that he would take a life without any remorse. So he instilled fear into the ones that were with him.
I wish I'd never heard the word vampire, the word cult, the word Rod Ferell.
I believe that if he was let out, he would kill someone again.
He went to Florida and he killed people. And if they wouldn't have caught him, he'd have done it again and again and again.
Mr. Bailiff, I'm going to ask you to bring Mr. Ferell and his counsel before the bench. You stated it best to Baton Rouge Sergeant Ben Odom. When I killed those people, I felt a rush. I felt like I was a god. But I guess if I was a god, I wouldn't be here today, now would I? It is hereby ordered and adjudged, Roderick Justin Ferell, for the murder of Richard Wendorf. You are hereby sentenced to death.
Going to the electric chair is, as morbid as it may sound, it's been a fantasy of mine. I used to think about that a long time ago when I was 9 years old. Oh, I used to dream about my own death. So it was just intriguing. It was almost like I was romantic with the subject of death. I don't care how I die as long as I do so. I have nothing left on earth. When we arrived at the home, I had asked Scott if he was sure he wanted to go through with this because he had never been involved in criminal activities. He agreed that he did, so we went to the house, we entered it, and while in the garage, I just thought offhand that if the male Wendorf, Ricky or Richard, would have been awake, I might need something in protection just in case I needed to get out of there. So I searched around and I found the murder weapon, the crowbar. And branding that, well, I went in, we saw that Richard was asleep and that Naomi was nowhere around, so we looked around, we decided if there was anything else we'd like to take. And of course, Heather, she had asked me to take a couple things from the house for her as souvenirs, is how she told me. So, while going back through the house, I really have no idea where the notion came from, but Scott and I just decided to kill them. So that's what we did. childish manner, Scott and I impishly danced around his body before he was dead. Just, strangely enough, it was a rush, a teenager's rush, to know that he was asleep and not know that we held his fate in our hands. And after we finished our foolish dance, I stood over him and began to strike his head repeatedly with a crowbar until his life was taken. I don't know whether it was my conscience or not, but it said, by doing this, you could utterly destroy your life and the life of others. And then, after all the consequences and thoughts about not doing it came through my head, one single voice came forth and it said, fuck it. Simple as that. And that's whenever I brought the crowbar down.
Rod when I was 17, and his dad and me got married a couple weeks later, and he left when Rod was a couple weeks old, and it's been me and Rod since then until just the last few years. And this is him, his first day of kindergarten. This was at our house. This is him when he was 5, and he's eating his little lunch there when he came home from school, because they get to go home from school at like around noon. This was in Murray, Kentucky. We like the same kind of music. We go to the same kind of movies.
Victims, aren't we all?
And he was like 16. I took him to see The Crow, which is one of both our favorite movies. And he used to dress up with the makeup, like the Crow, and he would borrow I have a shirt that's the real tight black, like the guy wore on the Crow movie. He was a blast to live with, an absolute blast.
I was into my arts. I draw, I paint, mainly fantasy. Dragons, fairies, mythological beasts, concepts such as that. The concrete reality has too many limitations set on it, but with abstract, you can literally do almost anything. You have more area to work with because it's abstract.
He was in 9th grade at Callaway County High School, and he got expelled. Things started going really downhill really quick. He very first started smoking pot when he was like 14 years old, 13, 14 years old. He was doing some acid. Then when he got to Murray, he met up with some people and he got addicted to, he was doing crank, heroin and cocaine, and he was shooting up using the needle. When cocaine would hit, he would go into a rage. He would knock holes in walls. He would break furniture. He would cuss. He would talk to me like I was some kind of a dog. But he would just like that, just within a minute, you know, his personality would change.
When Rod showed up at school, he was, you know, he attracted me because of the fact that we're black. like I did, you know, and he didn't want to fit in with a clique or any of that shit. It was just like, he didn't care. He didn't care what people thought about him, which attracted me to him. He was very, he liked his solitude.
Rod was a beautiful person. He was so charming and charismatic. He is elegant, and life with him was awesome, because you never knew what was going to happen, what each day was going to be like. One day could be so calm and peaceful, and the next day you could have things blowing up in your face. Everything was crazy. Rod, at first, was a very sensitive and very nice person, and then each day he got more demented, and he once told me that he had an evil side that was taking over and that he was going to fall into it, and he was scared.
People tried to get us in fights, but I was already stereotyped as a vampire, a witch, you name it, Satan, Lucifer, Antichrist, all that bullshit. So finally I said, to hell with it. I followed him through the hall one day, walked in this class, walked up behind him and introduced myself to him.
And one day he approached me and we began speaking. Came to find out we had much in common. And after we hit it off that well, we just became close friends. He then explained the vampire lifestyle to me because I'd always been interested in it. And one night he crossed me over and we just grew closer from then on.
Rod was my chosen one. Every sire has a chosen one. No matter how many he embraces, he has that one specific person that if something was to happen to him, they would take over his place.
Well, that night, it was rather cold that night. And he had told me a place to go meet him. So I went and I waited for him and he showed up. He picked me up in a truck and we drove around and picked up a few people because he had to pick someone up. Then we drove out to a cemetery and we began the process, and basically I cut myself and he took from me, and he cut himself and I took from him, and then we sat in quiet meditation for a while.
When you feed, it's the joining of one's life forces. When you take their blood into you by an incision or you bite them, they become one with you for all eternity. Not even death can separate you.
He was like us. He was one of us. You know, we held him in here, and we took him in, we loved him, and we gave him a home.
I've known of the darker side ever since I was 5 years old. That was when my first taste of blood. It was deer's blood. My uncle was a hunter. All my family are hunters. And he drained it into a jar, and we sat on the front porch drinking it out of a jar with straws. My mom really spazzed on his ass, but, you know, I liked it.
Ever since I was a little child, I'd always had interest in vampiric lifestyles. The myths of the vampire, they brought me to love them, and then the realities that I found out later. But just the more I learned about them, the more I wanted to become one of them. They were just literally one of the greatest gifts I could see fit on earth for anyone.
He wanted to be the prince of this city and every city. He wanted to take over and make everybody a vampire or a witch or a werewolf or something, He wanted everybody to bow to him. I watched Rod cut somebody so deep that you could see the muscle and drink from them. I've unfortunately seen Rod kill a cat. His cat was bugging him. He picked it up and he threw it into a tree and killed it. And then he laughed. He says, "I'll do anything for a thrill."
I sit there and I watched him one night. You know, this is when I really knew that Rod was slipping, when he killed that fucking cat. When he slammed that cat into that tree, that was probably the catalyst right there. I was shocked because I didn't expect it. It was petting the kitty, wham! Split second thing, you know. What the fuck could I do?
And then he wanted to take out the people in this town, the ones that had made him and the ones that were part of the other clan he broke off from, and kill them and become all-powerful.
Very many times he betrayed me. By embracing others without my permission. He betrayed my friendship by threatening my life and the life of my fiance, threatening my friends' lives. He betrayed my love for him.
Rod Ferell, Scott Anderson come over to my apartment, and they announced they were coming to Florida to pick up someone that they called Zoe, and we didn't know her real name at the time. That was Heather Wendorf. Well, things weren't looking too good for me, so I decided, you know, can I go? Just give me about an hour to pack. I was happy because I actually believed I was going to have a new start in life. That's what my plans were when I came from Kentucky. I loaded my things into the back of the Buick Skylark, which belonged to Scott Anderson, and we left.
I saw him the night that he left for Florida. It was Scott, Dana, and Shay went with Rod. Yeah, there's 3 of them. I didn't say anything to him. They yelled out some stupid shit, childish stuff out the car when they flew by us, but that was the last time I saw Rod.
Back in 1995 was the first time I met Rod Ferell. I had joined Rod's cult. I joined out of curiosity, and mostly because I felt isolated a lot. And going into the cult gave me a sense of belonging. He took and busted a shaving razor apart to take the razor blade, and he made 3 small incisions on my forearm right here. And he proceeded to milk the blood out into a glass, a small glass. And he did the exact same thing to himself and put his blood in with mine. And he mixed a little bit of water with it, and I had to drink it. It was disgusting. To tell you the truth, it was disgusting. At first, when we first started down here to Florida, we were all relaxed. We'd more or less cut up and joke about the future, about what we were going to do. The closer we got to Florida, the more tense it became in the vehicle, because here you have 4 kids in a small Buick Skylark, and the whole back end of it's just covered in our possessions, and some of our possessions were sitting in our lap. We'd been driving for hours and hours only to stop to use the restroom or to get groceries, and the tension had just kept building and building.
What their original plan was that him and Charity, or Shay, was going to get married in Daytona, and then it was going to be Zoe, which is Heather Windorf, and Rod, Scott, Dana, and Shay, or Charity Kesey, was all going to move to New Orleans then and live there, like in an apartment together. That was their plan.
Myself, Charity, and Heather were at Heather's boyfriend's house, and we arrived there at approximately 9:30, and we left at about 10 minutes till 10. Rod and Scott were supposed to meet us. They weren't there, so we all decided to go back to the road that Heather lived on.
Scott and I had decided we wanted the Ford Explorer because we felt since we were picking up these people, we needed a bigger car, and we didn't care how we got that car. So we went to the house, we entered it, and while in the garage, I searched around and I found the murder weapon, the crowbar. I was trying to impale him. I did not know at that time that you need sharp objects to impale people. This was a rather blunt one, and I believe it was 5 blows I took trying to plunge the crowbar into his heart. She spotted me at the other end of the kitchen, blood splattered, crowbar in my hand, hair disarrayed, looking very disheveled. She asked me then what I wanted and what my intent was, and I did not give a reply because at this time my mind was on only one mode, and that was to kill. So I went forth to attack her, and she threw a scalding hot cup of coffee on me, of which only increased my instincts, if you will. At which point in time, like I said, between 30 and 60 seconds, I took her life, approximately the same way I had taken Richard's.
When Rod and Scott pulled up in the Ford Explorer behind the car that we were in, Heather turned around. She couldn't see who was driving, and she recognized the vehicle as being her parents, and she started freaking out even more because she thought her parents were coming to look for her. Rod and Scott were screaming out the windows to stop, pull over, and Charity was driving the car at that point, so she stopped the car and turned the hazard lights on. I stayed in the car with Heather, and Charity got out and went over to talk to Rod. And in the meantime, Scott was changing my license plates. When Charity came back, she motioned for me to get out of the car. So all the color had drained from her face. She was just white as a ghost. And she was just looking at me with a funny look on her face. I looked at her and I said, "What's wrong?" And she looked at me and she just started shaking her head. And I said, "What's wrong? Tell me." She said, "I don't know if Rod has killed Heather's parents or not, but he's got something red splattered all over the front of his t-shirt."
The 3 days we were on the run, it was an utter rush. I loved that because I knew every cop in the nation was looking for me. I knew that even by one slip, I could lose everything. Everything would go into catastrophe. And the only hard part was keeping the other 4 in line.
What scared me was the way Rod was behaving, because he was always jumping around, you know. Driving was more or less Rod's way of letting his anger out.
My sister had seen Rod on the news, and she called my parents' house and said, "Do you know where Rod's at?" And they said no. And she said, "Well, he's on the news. They're looking for him."
The long road home finally ended here. It was Heather's older sister, Jenny, who found their parents around 11 o'clock last night when she came home from work. They were beaten and bloodied. Police believe Heather and 3 of her friends took the couple's truck and tried to cover their tracks.
I was just numb. I was in shock. Just disbelief. Just could not believe. I was like, what happened? I've got to find out what happened, you know, what's going on, why did it happen, or what happened, and who was involved, you know, everything. We pretty much turned the TV on and just glued to the TV waiting, seeing if he was going to call or not, and
Rod more or less got off on the fact that he had killed Heather's parents. When we was driving in the Ford Explorer, he pulled the crowbar out from under the seat. He'd get so graphic as to show us the crowbar with the blood dried on it, and he'd say which end of the crowbar that he used to kill which one of the adults with. It was very terrifying. The air almost seemed charged with electricity, with anger. With anticipation of what was going to happen next.
It felt almost dreamlike when everything was going on. It felt like a nightmare. I couldn't leave. I was so afraid of him. If he could do that to my parents, what could he do to me? I was so scared.
Thing that was on Rod's mind at that point was to get together with one of his old friends, and I don't even know the guy's real name, but his street name was called Chicken Man. We parked the Ford Explorer in an alley. We proceeded to go to this, it was like an apartment complex. It was the worst side of town. And we were walking, we were all unarmed. Right as we had turned the corner to go down the street, a cop car comes zooming around the corner at the other end of the street. They had completely went around that part because it was just too bad for them to enter into. And they pulled up and they stopped beside us and they asked us where we were going. And that's when Rod spoke up and he said, "Well, I'm going to look for a friend of mine down there." He said, "Well, I advise y'all to turn around and, you know, go back the other way unless you're armed or anything." He goes, "You don't have any weapons on you, do you?" We had maybe $5 in money, if that. And the Ford Explorer was just about on empty. And Rod had picked this one house that he decided that he was going to break into. And Rod took the crowbar that he had committed the murders with him. And we approached the house. There were 2 cars at the house, but nobody was home, which I thank God for, because after finding out about the murders, I seriously believed he would have killed anyone that would have been in that house. And Rod had found a crossbow with some arrows and some bullets that he thought might fit the gun that he took. Rod come across some liquor that he had wanted to take with us, so he got that. We come across this little plastic, I guess it's like a bank, like a piggy bank, and it had a lot of change in it, and we took that. And we had a little over $20 in change. So we put the $20 in gas and we made it to Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Rod Ferell had a pretty strong hold on these individuals. I would say that had he not been caught, that he would have gotten recruited new members, and his group would have grown, or his cult, if you want to call it a cult, would have grown to who knows how big. I believe Heather Wendorf was driving. They came down to this location where they got rid of the shotgun and the other items. They went to the casino. They went to the USS Kidd, which is a World War II destroyer we have on display here. And then they went down to just past the Kidd, north of it, and got rid of the murder weapon. Then they drove around for a little while in Baton Rouge and ended up at the Centerplex where Charity Kesey made a telephone call to her, I believe her grandmother or her mother.
I knew that if I tried to contact anyone at that point, he would either try to harm me or try to more or less ensure my silence by getting closer to Charity or Heather, because I knew he would have hurt them if I would have tried to contact anyone. Charity called her grandmother, got the number for her mom, called her mom. Her mom said, well, go to such and such place to pick up some money and I'll wire you some money. I knew more or less that it was like a setup. Whenever Charity was actually on the payphone talking to her relatives, Rod was with her. So I knew he was monitoring the call. I don't know if he in fact knew if it was a setup or not, but I had a feeling something was going to happen.
I was in the city looking for another homicide suspect when I received the call, and I proceeded to the Howard Johnsons where uniformed officers were already present.
2 officers approached us and took us out to the squad car, and in the meantime, all the rest of the officers surrounded the Ford Explorer. Heather
Wendorf was upset, but she was the only one that appeared to be upset. She was crying.
It was like my whole world was gone. I had to start all over. I don't know why he did it. I don't think I'll ever know.
Ferell was pretty arrogant. The others were fairly subdued. I advised them of their rights for Miranda and had them transported down to our detective office.
And ever since I've been arrested, I have regretted that the day I left with a passion. I regret the fact that I didn't go to my family and try to work my problems out and get some help somehow. I let my stupid pride get in my way, and I left. And I regret it. I wish I'd never heard the word vampire, the word cult, the word Rod Ferell. I wish I'd never met Rod Ferell or Scott Anderson. I don't want nothing to do with any of them.
All of the kids, I don't remember if Dana Cooper had any, but Rod Ferell certainly, and Charity Kesey and Heather Wendorf had, and Scott Anderson had old and fairly fresh marks on their arms where they had self-mutilated themselves with knives or with each other for the purpose of licking the blood that came out. To me, Rod Ferell is a mixed-up kid that had homicidal tendencies, and I believe that he still does. I believe that if he was let out, he would kill someone again.
hasn't had to face me really. We talked on the phone once, and he's wrote me a couple of letters. I've never written him back. He's never had to face me one-on-one, me asking the questions and probing his head to find out what the hell happened, why he flew off the wall like he did. You know, I've had people that have approached me about taking another person's life before, to be truthful. I've had that done before. And it didn't matter what state of mind I was in, whether I was drugged, whether I was pissed or depressed. It didn't matter. I always, you know, came to my senses like, you know, it's stupid. I still cannot grasp the concept as to why you went through with it. What propelled you into that area? How did you cross that line? What the hell was, what was your motivation exactly?
Well, that's quite simple. Every individual has that point in time, at least once in their life, where they can cross this line. Most people are able to turn back. I myself, as many people well know, had basically enthralled myself in the deterioration of myself. I had taken the small amount of decay I did have, and I just built it. I let it grow. I wanted to become fully decayed in mind, soul, body, everything. I wanted to be darkness. That was part of it, because I allowed myself to become so deteriorated in mind and spirit. It allowed me to cross the line with more ease. With the conflict that you and I had at that time, since I did and I do love you as a father, I had never accepted anyone else like that. And I felt with that conflict that there was no reason, that there was no possibility we could ever go back to being the family we were.
And you figured that I wouldn't take you back in, which the whole time the door was still open. It's just law was preventing you from walking through or me saying, hey, you know.
It was my own blind eyes.
You know, so, I mean, that does clear up some places. You're just basically talking about the primal instincts of man. But your life wasn't in danger. You were not threatened in any way.
No. That's why I said, that's why I take full responsibility.
Yeah.
Because I had a decision. I just merely chose the wrong decision. I knew damn well that I could have done one thing. I sat there whenever I first entered the house, and I knew that I could turn back at any point in time I wished. Even when I was in the house, I knew I could leave. I knew I could leave them alive right there, and they would never even have known I was in there. It was just the instincts, the urges, and then that suppressed rage. All of them came together to form a whole persona of itself. And no matter what my efforts, could not have controlled it at that point.
You didn't just kill those people down there, because you fucking destroyed me in here. Because you are my family, and you did this shit. It hurt.
Like I said, what I did had nothing to do with the family. Had nothing to do against Jaden yourself.
I really regret that this happened to Rod. I love him very much. I took him into my house as well as my heart, and he fucked it up. He wanted to do something shocking to be recognized because he felt like a nobody. That's what his whole little entourage was about. He felt like a nobody. So he wanted to be a somebody. And plus it was a major power trip for him, like I said. Rod got greedy, which is a very, very bad thing when you live this life, because you do that, you're endangering a shitload of people, and hell will come down upon your head.
Surely you're walking away from this with something. What have you learned from this, Rod?
It's only made my acceptance of death much more ease. It's, like I've said before, I've always accepted death. It's just now I long for it.
You think you're going to hell?
If I would have to answer that truthfully, yes. I've always believed that.
Any comment? Sure, you got something to say?
Yeah, I love America.
Today you're here for your detention hearing. The purpose of the detention hearing is for me to review the probable cause affidavits or any orders which bring you here today to make sure that you're being legally detained. So you need not make any statements about the reason why you are here. So if all of you will raise your right hand, please listen carefully and answer out loud. Do each of you swear or affirm that you will testify truthfully and state the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. I cannot appoint a public defender. It sounds like that you would not qualify for a public defender, so I am going to detain you. Do you want an attorney to represent you?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any ability to hire an attorney on your own?
No, ma'am.
Making statements to you, especially you can call Mr. Graves at that number that I'm right now.
Can your parents afford to hire an attorney?
Not that I know of.
Where do your parents work?
They're not working right now. They're currently moving here.
Do they own a home?
No, I said they're currently moving here because of all this.
Okay, I will appoint a public defender to represent you.